All right, hopefully that light in the back is not too blinding. I think it's all good. So, I'm taking a page out of Andrew's book by doing this week's discussion as a video entry because I think it's a lot easier for me to talk about things rather than just write about them because I can kind of get lost in my writing and then forget what I was talking about to begin with. And I think this will allow me to look back and keep my thoughts about this book to be a little more streamlined than they would usually be in writing. So, this week, reading Teaching to Transgress, I downloaded ebook copy of it. I also found it online for free, which I was like, that's awesome. And just jumping right into it, talking about first the author, Miss Bell Hooks. What really struck me first off is how Hooks writes from a place of being a Black woman in education and seeing herself as a progressive teacher in this environment. Because what I've noticed with a lot of these authors is that they don't try to separate. They'll bring in anecdotes from their own experience, but their experience in their life is not the guiding feature of their writing. And Bell Hooks immediately goes, I am drawing upon my experience as a Black woman growing up in originally segregated schools and then moving to desegregated schools and talking about the differences she found in the pedagogies present in both areas. And once again, Hooks starts off with talking about authority, which is something that I think is the big theme for me this entire summer, is thinking about authority in the curriculum. How can I teach to transgress? And I think that's quickly becoming a phrase that the more I think about, the more I go, this is what teaching should be. Because teaching to transgress is kind of surpassing the bounds of being an authority figure. It's using part of your authority, more of a critical relational perspective of authority, to relate to your students rather than to impose authority upon them. And I like when Hooks talked about her experience in her segregated school. I think it was a Booker T. Washington school, that she loved it there because in that school, everyone is very aware of our ability to learn here, to learn about our world, to learn history, math, science, all the other disciplines is more than just a privilege. It is this ability for us to move past the racial lines set in our society right now. So we can use this opportunity to really, when they say learn, it's more than just the subjects. It's learning to overpower and undermine white supremacist ideals of the time. And then as she contrasts that back to going to a desegregated school, she immediately remarked upon how things are totally different over there. The teachers are less interested in teaching of ways to transgress societal boundaries and is more focused on, and I think she does have a quote in there, I pulled it up, about how basically how the teachers are more interested in keeping these little, she calls them mini kingdoms, in their own classroom, where they are the ultimate authority on what is studied, what is talked about, how, as the term now is, how political we can get in our conversations. And I think Hooks has it right on the money, where our job should be to transgress for teachers. I mean, what are we teaching? Are we teaching them how to obey me, how to obey authority? Or are we encouraging our students to use their knowledge to enact meaningful change? And I think the chapter that really struck me most is chapter 2. Chapter 2, she talks a lot about deep-seated sexist, racial discriminatory, and white supremacist ideals that pervade our modern society. And she definitely talks about how, the quote is, the public figures who speak the most to us, on page 27, about a return to old-fashioned values embody the evils King describes about thing-oriented society, basically the commodification of peoples and students They're most committed to maintaining systems of domination, racism, sexism, class exploitation, and imperialism. They promote a perverse vision of freedom that makes it synonymous with materialism. They teach us to believe that domination is natural, that it is right for the strong to rule over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. What amazes me is that so many people claim not to embrace these values, and yet our collective rejection of them cannot be complete since they prevail in our daily lives. And what really strikes me about her writing is that she's writing from like 1994. And I see this now more today across social media, in my classroom, news outlets, current events abounds, that people have this idea of we have moved forward progressively as a society while trying to, Bell Hooks even makes fun of the fact that people like to pretend that racism is gone. Racism died in the 1960s, although that couldn't be any further from the fact that white supremacy is back on the rise in our political institutions and the way that we think about authority. And she talks about the feminist movement because she's a very outspoken feminist. And what I've noticed now is that there's a huge stigma against the term feminist, where feminazi pops up a lot. I'm sure y'all have heard that before. And it's basically this idea that anybody who's progressive, they view it as these people who are trying to undermine our society to, create a system where white cis men are now the oppressed, and that it is all the other marginalized groups who rule now, which I think the more I see of it, it seems to be, it's a move. I think about equity, where we are attempting to establish a more equitable society to where marginalized groups have a better chance of success, both economically, in their own lives, and for their own health. And that any move towards equity is seen by the ruling class, aka white, middle, upper class men, as a move against them. And they basically co-opt these terms to support their own idea of this is how the world is moving right now. Hold on just one second.